Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Rivelli. I'm the CEO of Plant Construction and a member of the Bay Area Council Executive Committee. California's knowledge-based economy is the envy of the world, producing breakthrough technologies that continue to change the world, creating global companies, millions of jobs, and attracting billions of dollars in investment. Attracting and retaining talent are essential for California to remain an innovation leader. As we look to improve business, we need to look at how industries and organizations transform in the aftermath of the global pandemic. Leaders have to identify the opportunities and the best way to execute in the new business landscape. The past 16 months has accelerated change across all business. Which industries are trailblazing and which ones face tremendous transformation over the next 18 months? Looking ahead, where are the biggest opportunities for purposeful growth and innovation? To answer these questions, we're pleased to welcome one of California's iconic tech leaders. Like me, Meg Whitman is originally from Long Island, New York. As CEO, Meg has navigated some of the biggest companies and moments in business. Meg has served in leadership roles at the Walt Disney Company, DreamWorks, Procter & Gamble, and Hasbro. She also was a CEO of eBay, where she saw its expansion from 30 employees and $4 million in revenue to more than 15,000 employees and $8 billion in annual revenue. She was inducted into the U.S. Business Hall of Fame in 2008 and the Bay Area Council's Business Hall of Fame just last year. She was named one of the 5 most powerful women by Fortune magazine several times, and she's the National Board Chair for Teach for America. We've asked Meg to join us to discuss what California must do to maintain and grow its role as global innovation leader. To lead the conversation, we're honored to welcome Salim John Mohammed, West Market Unit Leader and Senior Managing Director for Accenture, and fellow member of the Bay Area Council Executive Committee. Salim is a technology, media, and communications leader with more than 30 years of global experience and leads about 10,000 people in the West, spanning 13 states. Please join in welcoming Salim John Mohammed and Meg Whitman for a discussion on what's next for California's knowledge-based economy and what lies ahead for leading businesses that are part of our innovation ecosystem.
Thanks so much, Chris, and good morning, everyone. It's my honor to be speaking this morning to a truly legendary leader, Meg Whitman. Good morning, Meg, and welcome.
Good morning.
Our goal this morning is to get Meg's perspective on a number of issues on the minds of business leaders in the Bay Area and across the state. We're hoping to explore with Meg what's driving a strong economic recovery after the pandemic, the migration of prominent companies to other states, the implications of remote and hybrid working models on our state, and key business trends that are creating opportunities for us here in California. So with that introduction, let's get started. Meg, homelessness, lack of affordable housing, high cost of living, jobs in our environment are some of the biggest issues we face today. We hear many government leaders talk about driving change and action, but progress has been slow. From your perspective, what's working and what's not working? What advice would you give government and business leaders?
Well, good. Well, first of all, thank you for having me this morning. Delighted to be here. You know, the challenges, in my view, that California faces is not new challenges. This has been going on for well over a decade, but they are now coming to the fore, I think, because of the pandemic. And I think there's a couple of things that California has to be really focused on. One is we are now losing population. In 2020, we will lose population for the first time since 1900, if you can imagine that. And think about all the companies that have left. I mean, I just wrote a few of them down: Oracle, Toyota, Hewlett, Packard Enterprise, Charles Schwab, McKesson, Jamba Juice, North Face, CBRE, Palantir, Digital Reality, Tesla, and Wells Fargo Bank. And what you're seeing is these companies are leaving for what they perceive to be greener pastures. I would argue we still are the innovation center of the world. There is so much to recommend the Bay Area and California, but I think there's some things that we need to do. And I would first start by focusing on education. K through 12, The gem of California is the UC system, which has seen decreased funding over the last 20 years, and the California State University system. So those things have to be right because all the employees and folks come out of those educational institutions. The second thing is, you talked about it, the war against poverty and homelessness, we are losing that war. Just go to every major city and you can see the tragedy of what's happening in homelessness, which relates to healthcare because so many of the homeless need mental health and services to get back on their feet. So I think we've got a big road ahead of us, and the pandemic did not help. And by the way, remote work, many people say that 50% of the jobs in Northern California can be done remotely. Maybe those folks aren't coming back. So we've got to redouble our efforts, I think, as business leaders to have a seat at the table in Sacramento on the issues that face California. And they are regulations, taxes, high cost of living, homelessness, social inequity, you know what they are. But I think the business community here is going to have to get a whole lot more involved than it has, say, in the last 10 or 15 years.
Technology has fueled economic growth in our state for decades. And, as a technology leader, what can technology do as a catalyst to address some of the issues that we face here in the state and continue to have us be an innovation leader for the planet?
Well, listen, technology is the heart of California. It's the heart of certainly the Bay Area. And that's going to continue to be the case. I don't think we're necessarily going to lose our leadership in technology innovation, but it could happen. I mean, look what's happening in Texas and, Florida and some of these other states. But listen, technology is accelerating at an incredible pace. I don't think it's just because I've been around for 30 or 40 years. I think the pace of change is remarkable. And it's all about industry convergence, as you know. Every company, in my view, now is a tech company. All you have to do is go to the Central Valley in California and see the technology that is at work in, the farming community and the agricultural community. But it's fintech, it's medtech, it's biotech, it's everything. And so I think that notion of industry convergence and how we as leaders create different ways to work, how we create the vision for our enterprises about what is possible in terms of industry convergence, I think is absolutely critical. It's only going to accelerate, in my view.
To drive industry convergence as well as sort of technology transformation, really talent has been the fuel for our economic growth and innovation. But the war for talent today is more intense than ever, especially diverse talent. What advice would you give business leaders for attracting and retaining the best talent? What do our government and academic institutions need to do to build the next generation of talent here in the Bay Area?
Well, it's interesting. It relates back to the challenges facing California. I mean, I think for over the last 10 years, California now has competition. For many years, anyone who really wanted to be in technology tried to go to school in California if they were not raised here. They came from all over the world to come to school here and work here. Now, all of a sudden, we've got competition, not only from other states in the United States. We've got competition now from India, from China, from Eastern Europe, from all over the world. So competition is the name of the game. And then, for different parts of the country as well. So listen, I think, in my view, the first thing that has to happen back to the education system, we've got to fully fund UC and CSU and K through 12 education. Do you know in 1956, we had the #1 public school system in America? Today, we're 48th out of 50 states. That has long-term implications. The second is, I think, from how do you make this a hospitable place to do business, right? It's back to the jobs. It's interesting, again, back to competition. When I was the CEO of HP, I was visited by heads of foreign state, by every governor from, the major states in the country. And, we've never had to compete for jobs. So my advice to the governor is, and I've told, his staff this, is we got to now go market California. We got to convince the Charles Schwabs to stay here, the Hewlett Packard Enterprises to stay here, the Jamba Juices to stay here because of what can be the future of California. So it's all about competition. And I think the state government has to wake up to that, which they are. I mean, listen, Gavin Newsom, who I guess you're going to hear from at the end of the day, is very aware of what's happening. And you think about the gig economy, that's actually something that could be very helpful to California. So lots of opportunities, I think, to change the dynamics here, but it's going to take, like everything else that's hard to do, leadership.
You mentioned this in your opening comments, but many organizations are talking about hybrid working models as the way of the future. What's your view on the workforce of the future? What are the implications of a more virtual workforce on collaboration
Yeah.
and innovation? And what are the implications for our economy with, the democratization of talent, if you will, with the virtual
Yeah.
workforce?
Yeah.
Love your perspective.
Well, I'm a little torn because, I, started out my career at a very different time and place. But I will make two comments. One is I think remote work is here to stay. Maybe not 5 days a week, maybe 3 days a week. But I do think we will be able to draw talent from all over the country and frankly, all over the world. What I do worry about is the ability to create on Zoom. I think it's great for communication. It's great for updates. There's lots of things that this medium is fantastic for. But I worry about our ability to, create and solve really tough problems, because the way I've always done that for so many years is you get the right people in the room. And then there's those interactions that happen, in the coffee break room, in the bathroom, in wherever. And so I do think there will be a hybrid workforce. I think it'll be, but I will tell you, this next generation, the 20-somethings, for the most part, they actually want to be remote. And, maybe that's going to work out because they've been raised in a different environment than perhaps you and I. But I still am a believer of in-person for, really creative problem solving. But I may be proven wrong on this. Honestly, I'm sort of convicted about it, but only because of the history of how I've done things. So we'll see.
Okay. There's been a lot of discussion about regulation of big tech. Certainly, we've got, a lot of large technology companies here that are facing increasing regulatory pressure. What does that, potential breakup of big technology mean for our state? And what's your perspective on whether we should continue to scale these businesses or force them to compete differently?
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm sort of a free market theorist, and so my going in assumption is that less regulation is perhaps the right thing to do for most businesses. I think we are in a very interesting perspective or interesting time right now, whether some of these big tech companies maybe are too big in some dimensions and control too much information, and think about the importance now of, back to industry convergence, of AI and machine learning and how that interacts with this convergence. So I think what I would recommend is that these companies now take real responsibility, and they've begun to real responsibility for regulating themselves, and that's the best way to avoid the heavy hand of government. And I do worry because people in the Bay Area, we know tech better than most people, and so I worry about an over-regulation or in what would be good intentions to try to change how the dynamic works, is that the government does things that are not optimal. And so I think it's pretty clear that many of these companies may well be regulated. So how do they tee up what the right thing to do is, as opposed to just hope that the right thing happens, which may or may not actually. So again, I'm a free market theorist. I have a big belief that it's better to try to figure out how to do the right thing as a company, as opposed to have someone legislate it for you.
Just as we talk about technology, as you think about the future of our state and our economy, what do you see as the biggest opportunities? You've talked a little bit about industry convergence, med tech, retail tech, etc. How do we continue to be an economic and innovation leader and continue to sort of create a prosperous environment for Californians? Yeah.
Well, first of all, much of this innovation happens naturally if the environment is right? You can't, sort of legislate innovation. If we've proved anything in Silicon Valley, it happens organically. It's a function of the venture capital community, the university community, and then the big tech companies that then give way to smaller tech companies. Think about it, HP, the granddaddy of Silicon Valley. Up until about 10 years ago, virtually every founder of major tech companies in Silicon Valley traced their roots back to HP. And so you cannot underestimate the importance of these grand, big, iconic American companies who seed the next generation of talent. It's super important. It's a really important triangle. But I think, coming back to where we started, making sure we do not lose venture capital money to other states. And by the way, that is starting to happen. There is some real worry that our share of venture capital in California is starting to decrease. And it's probably okay if it decreases some, but I will tell you, being the hotbed of venture capital has been a really important part of our success here. And then, I've said what I think about the university system, a number of times here. And then I would say, listen, we've got to solve some of these social inequities here. The homelessness problem, the housing problem. We're losing low income and middle income workers to other states because they can no longer afford to live here. But we're also losing wealthy people. And as you know, we have an incredible tax structure where about 300,000 individuals in our state account for 50% of the personal income tax. So you lose one very wealthy individual to Texas or Idaho or Florida, it actually has a big impact. So I think we have to think about, what is the structure of the tax system here? What is the structure of how we generate revenues that are absolutely critical for an important and functioning government? But how do we do it without driving out the low-income people, the middle-income people, and then, of course, the wealthy people? And that's what we're doing right now. So I think we've got some work to do there.
You mentioned industry convergence as an opportunity. Do you see, California sort of leading the way in that convergence? And sort of where do you see that happening most in sort of the, in your conversations with business executives? You said every company is a technology company. Some would argue with that. So I'd love your perspective.
Yeah. So listen, I think in many ways, Silicon Valley led industry convergence because, when you're starting something new, you can take the best of one industry, the best of another, and marry it together, which is what we've done here for years. It's, often people say we're disrupting existing businesses. That's true. But the way it's been done is you say, okay, well, what do we know about this industry? And then how can we be more efficient? I mean, effectively, what we've been doing is making, inefficient markets that have existed for many years more efficient by industry convergence. What you're now seeing is companies around the country understand this. Look at transportation, pioneered here by Tesla, but now you look at General Motors and you look at Ford and all the international car companies, they are on a race to industry convergence around transportation, whether that's AV or electric vehicles or whatever. So I think in many ways we can own that startup mentality here and then figure out, how to help in some ways these bigger companies that are trying to manage this transformation. I will tell you, for having in business for 40 years, it's much harder in many ways to transform a big company like we did at HP, as opposed to start from scratch. It's a little bit like, is it easier to renovate your house, or sometimes it's easier to build a new house? And that's a hackneyed analogy, but it's kind of true. Because think about all the culture change that you have to do. But you're looking at all these big companies, and they are embracing technology in a way that they haven't in the last 10 years. I mean, in your practice, you can go through just about every single industry, and they are leaning much more heavily into technology than they have in the last 10 years because they have to, or they will be, made obsolete by, a startup that is disrupting their industry. And so I think there's lots and lots of opportunity, whether it's more fintech, whether it's transportation. Insurance, I think, is one that is really ripe for all kinds of transformation. So, media and entertainment is at the beginning of that big transformation. So, lots of exciting things going on. And if I was a young entrepreneur today, I'd be trying to figure out, which one of these, still inefficient ways of doing business I could go in and make lives better for, every American and every person in the world.
Meg, you mentioned AI earlier. There's a lot of investment, a lot of innovation in that space, and a lot of concern about the implications for jobs and the future of humanity as more and more stuff gets automated or AI starts to replace humans. Do you see a future where we're going to be AI led, or is it sort of human plus machine?
Well, listen, there's a lot of people who've been thinking a lot about this, and some of the leading lights in our industry have weighed in heavily on this. Listen, my experience is, especially having run for governor of California and been quite involved in politics, is what happens is, we sort of guardrail. We'll head off into an extreme, maybe where there are some, very ill-advised effects of AI, But then the community, the populace, regulators, end up coming back into the middle. So I suspect there will be some well-publicized abuses, in the next decade or two, and then we will self-regulate. At least that is what I hope. But I do think the conversion of hardware, software, and AI really do create some very special opportunities to make lives better for people in industries like healthcare. I think there's, tremendous opportunity there. So again, I would sort of not necessarily be for overregulation there, just be cognizant of what can happen when you unleash something as powerful as we know AI to be.
So my final question, and one that's likely on everyone's mind, is what's next for Meg?
Yeah.
Would love your thoughts.
So I don't quite know. My last startup, was a bit of a victim of pandemic and probably some other things as well. Maybe not the perfect, product market fit. So we'll see. I'm on 2 public company boards, Procter and Gamble, which I adore because I started my career there, and I just joined the General Motors board because of what I just described about, industry convergence. And then I'm doing some, startup advising, particularly trying to focus on female tech entrepreneurs because there's still not enough female tech entrepreneurs. So, excited about that. And then we'll see what I do next. I'm not entirely sure. I don't mind having a little time to relax and think, which, I think all of us could spend a little bit more time thinking. But when you're in a full-time job, like you are, Salim, it's like you're doing. And so it's been nice to have a little extra time.
Well, we're looking forward to hearing about what's next. And you're right, the digital intensity of today's world, where you're literally on these Zoom calls all day long, it certainly doesn't leave a lot of time for thinking. So I'm glad you're spending that time, and we look forward to seeing what's next. Meg, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and this morning, and we appreciate your time, but also your insight and your perspective. It's always pragmatic. We've got a number of challenges and opportunities ahead, and I feel like California will rise to the challenge.
I think so too. I think we'll figure it out. But I would leave you with one thought: the business community needs to get more involved than they have been. They've got to have a seat at the table in Sacramento. So good. Well, thank you very much, Salim.
Well, Jim and the Bay Area Council are absolutely committed to making sure we have a voice in Sacramento. Appreciate the candid conversation. I'll now hand off to Janet Riley, who's going to have a conversation with Senator Alex Padilla. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.